This is Garis, masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 554, entitled, How Will Masculism Affect Feminists? Description. How will masculist ideas affect feminists? It will come as a shock for monoconscious feminists to be told by masculists that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa. That masculists hate women who commit the big three gender crimes against men: women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering. Those women who don't become biconscious will be dumped by masculists, who will prefer to have relationships with biconscious feminists, thus putting strong moral pressure on monoconscious feminists to become biconscious, or be forced to die a slow, miserable death, utterly rejected by men, who will ignore them totally, punishing them for their monoconscious bigotry. Now the flyer itself. How will masculism affect feminists? Question mark. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. The gender political dynamic that is unfolding with my own on-again, off-again girlfriend, I see as just a microcosm of what is likely to play out in millions of cases over the next few years as freshly minted masculists project their masculist opinions onto their feminist girlfriends. There will inevitably be sparks and many breakups, as we see a repeat in the 2020s, but in reverse, of what happened in the 1970s, when millions of freshly minted feminists divorced their husbands, who could not adapt to the new expectations of their wives, who were influenced by feminist ideas. This flyer attempts to predict how the mass rise of masculist ideas will impact on women, on feminists, in brackets, since most women, after 6 decades of feminist gender political monopoly, have been influenced by feminist ideas, close brackets. So, jump a few years into the future, when MGTOW and masculist ideas have become a lot more widespread than they are now, brackets, and they are not inconsiderably widely spread as I write this, close brackets. So we can expect that there will be a masculist-feminist clash within millions of couples, as millions of feminist women in these couples are forced, capital letters, to come to terms with masculist thinking, because their masculist boyfriends are not giving them any choice. If these feminist girlfriends continue to insist that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed, then that monoconscious attitude of these feminists is going to clash violently with what the masculists are teaching the planet. That is, that in reality, gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, making them far more serious gender crimes against men than the rather milder ways that men oppress women. To masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen as being rather small beer in comparison with the big three ways that women oppress men, that is, oppressions that last for decades, making them major gender crimes that need to be wiped out and punished by law. I'm talking about women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fatherhood. If you're a masculist and you have a monoconscious feminist girlfriend, and you're looking for intellectual ammunition to confront her with the idea that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, then using the above big three that you can rattle off in a few seconds will give her something to think about. If she doesn't get the point immediately, then you can ram home the heavy level of gender political criminality of these big three, saying things such as, quote, "To masculists, fluffydom is manslavery, and manslavery is slavery, so is hated and a war issue. We men gave women a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century. So we put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat, parasitic asses and fip up, or be severely punished by men, by masculisted men, by not getting one. To masculists, the opposite of a fip is a fluffy, and fluffies are vermin to masculists, to be exterminated by being totally ignored, left to die, rotting on the shelf. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies, seeing them as 1,000 times worse than the slavers of Negroes in the early decades of the 1800s in the US. There were several million Negro slaves in the US at the time, whereas today there are several billion man-slaves in the world and several billion fluffy man-slavers who don't bother to fib up, who choose to study fluffy crap majors at high school and college, then expect to be able to live off the money and labour of some gullible, stupid, man-slaveable man who will work for her for decades of his life just to get a bit of sex from her from time to time. To masculists, manslavery is the worst of all gender crimes in either direction, brackets, from men onto women or from women onto men, and a war issue to masculists. Masculists are at war against the fluffies and fluffy feminists, aiming to wipe them out, not necessarily by going out into the streets and shooting them, in brackets, although it may come to that as a masculist reaction to the horrors that occur in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, close brackets, but by simply totally ignoring fluffies so that they are forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and totally rejected, that will cause millions of fluffies to suicide or to adapt to masculist demands that women must fip up and pull their financial weight and behave as responsible adults or be spat at and utterly, utterly rejected. Masculists punish fluffies severely due to the fact that manslavery is seen by the masculists as the greatest of all gender crimes, and a gender criminal manslaving fluffy is seen by masculists as the enemy to be wiped out, to be forced to suffer by being manless and hence childless, which will drive such women crazy, dying slowly, miserably, due to total rejection by men, by masculisted men. When nearly all men over the coming decade become masculisted, who have their masculist consciousnesses raised, learning that their role in life is not to be a manslave to a manslaving, parasitic, hated fluffy. Masculists have a similar hatred of women who divorce rape them in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce courts. One marriage in two fails, ending in divorce. That is well known. In about half of those divorces, the divorcing wife turns into a vindictive feminazi cunt who takes the attitude that, quote, "I'll take him for all he's got," end quote. That is, she goes to a fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court and has her ex-husband butchered to such a point that there is growing talk of a sex war amongst masculists when considering the horrific gender crimes committed by women against men in the divorce courts, that is, to one married father in four. Hundreds of millions of men, year after year, who loses custody to his kids, loses ownership of his house so she can raise her kids in it, loses half his wealth and stuff to her, forced to pay child support to his kids he will barely be allowed to see, forced to pay child support, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to get off her fat, parasitic, man-slaving ass and fip up. So by law, she's allowed to continue to man-slave him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to be fips or pay a heavy price. Masculists push for the creation of a fip society in which all adults are fips due to them being socialised and educated as children and youths to fip up, or be exterminated by masculists for not fipping up, that is, becoming fluffies who expect to live off the money and labour of a man and thus earn the hatred and severe punishment of the masculists who won't go near such women, spitting in their faces and making them feel subhuman, because the values of these fluffies are seen by masculists as subhuman and severely abusive to men, expecting men to be man-slaves to them just because they wiggle their twats at men from time to time. To have one's masculine consciousness raised means, effectively, to see fluffydom as man-slavery, and man-slavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. Masculists are at war against the fluffies and fluffy feminists and aim to exterminate them by totally ignoring them and making their fluffy lives so miserable that they are forced to fip up or to die a slow, miserable death. So hated are they by masculists, these man-slaving cunts. End of part 1.